first of all, need to see your face. Yeah, there she is. Hey, so good to see you.
You too. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm leaving for a girls' trip this afternoon, so I'll be very happy to get on the road and spend some time with my ladies.
I love it. I love
Yes.
it.
Yes, we rented a little cabin in Hocking Hills in Ohio.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to have a nature weekend.
Oh, that'll be good.
I'm
That'll be
excited.
good.
Yeah. Okay, sorry everyone. Just needed to take a quick moment to connect with my girl Mimi here. But welcome. We are going to give it a few minutes to let several more people join. We had an outrageous number of registrations for this event, so I'm going to assume that we'll have some more people kind of sprinkling in over the next few minutes. So we'll give it some time and then we'll get started here maybe in just a few minutes. So um, go grab that second cup of coffee, third cup of coffee, whatever number of cup of coffee you're on today. I myself am a big coffee drinker and also really enjoy a fun mug. So today I have my Ron Swanson Woman of the Year Award mug for any of my Parks and Recs fan. I was really feeling confidence today, going out on the week on a high note. So I snatched him up and said, let's have coffee together. So we'll give it a few more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. Also, just FYI, if you are like me and not feeling it sometimes with the camera, please feel free to keep your camera off. However, if you are like me today and really feel like you want to connect with the other people on this call, please turn your camera on so we can just see faces and reactions as we have this really amazing conversation together. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
One at a time.
All right, folks, we are looking pretty good. Still have hopefully some more people joining, but loving this crowd. Also, 42 people on the call, and I don't know if you, anyone here knows about the significance of the number 42, but apparently it's a universal number for good things and positivity. So what a great number to go ahead and get started on. So I'm going to just do a quick kind of welcome and let you guys know what we're about today and some of the people that are going to be on this call, and then we're going to kind of go through what's going to be hopefully some pretty intense but pretty great conversation about occupational segregation and how we as a team and an organization can support you alongside our partners who are going to be on this call and presenting today. So my name is Laura Steele. I am the Director of Business Consulting at EmployIndy. My role is working with businesses to understand what occupational segregation is. Oh. If everybody could just take a quick look at their screen and make sure they're on mute. Getting some feedback. Oh, got it. I think I got it down. All right. So we're going to take some time today to talk about what we can do with businesses to make sure that they are a good place to work for the community. I know we have some out-of-state people that are probably joining this call today, so this is relevant information no matter where you are, but a lot of what we're going to talk about today is kind of focused on not only young adults of color here in Marion County, but young adults of color in general, because that is the intention of the grant that is supporting this work that we're doing. So there may be some nuances in this conversation. I encourage everybody to just kind of stretch their brain a little bit beyond those nuances if they're not registering with you directly. But I hope that you will find some really good nuggets of information to take away today. So I'm going to do a quick screen share and then introduce a couple of the folks that are going to be on the call today. Sorry, hold on one second. One of our speakers is saying that she is struggling to find the link to the event. So Victoria, I think you're on the call. And then maybe Rachel, you might also be on the call. Would you mind emailing a link to Nicole Carey? I'll put her email address in the chat. And then everyone will have her email address to contact her about all of the cool things that she can do for you. One moment, guys. Sorry for the hold up.
I got her email, Laura.
You've got it? Okay, thank you. Let her know that it's coming her way. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay? Thumbs up or a quick head shake or clap emoji if you can see my screen okay? Awesome, thank you. So as I said, my name is Laura Steele, Director of Business Consulting at EmployIndy. We also, shortly, as soon as she gets the link, we'll have Dr. Nicole Carey with the Indy Equity Collaborative. She has been one of our partners for the last several years through the Generation Work Grant. This is a grant that we have been awarded through the National Fund for Workforce Solutions and the Annie E. Casey Foundation. The goal of this grant is to address inequities for young adults of color in the workplace. And it's been a really amazing opportunity to work with the different partners on this grant and do the work that we've been doing. And we'll talk about that with you offline, as it is a broader focus than what we're talking about today. So if you're interested, we can always talk about that offline. Also on the call is Victoria, our knight in shining armor, sending the link to Nicole. Victoria is with the Goodwill of Central and Southern Indiana, and has been a very integral partner along with other members of Goodwill in helping us get this work done and connecting with employers and young adults of color here in Marion County. And then some of our other presenters today, Michael Bradley and Vanessa Sachs with Child Trends. They are one of the technical assistance groups for this grant, and have all of the expertise in positive youth development. I'm sure a handful of you all on the call have heard of PYD. It is their expertise, and they will be sharing some very detailed information on how occupational segregation and positive youth development go hand in hand. So we'll take just one more second to confirm that Nicole is hopping on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm seeing the 3 little dots that you see on the text message, so I'm anticipating she's on her way. There she is, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Dr. Carey, welcome.
I
Biggest,
made
deepest
it.
apologies for that.
I made it, everyone. Hello.
Welcome, welcome. All right, Dr. Carey, I just did some quick introductions, so the floor is yours, and I've got your slides here. So if you want to take a big deep breath in and deep breath out, and just know that your friend Laura will send you the link in plenty of time next time, then we could go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm pretty sure it was my fault because normally when things are like this, it's my fault because
Nah,
the universe.
not today.
So, thanks for figuring it out and helping me get on. I'm really excited to chat with you all for a few minutes around occupational segregation. My presentation is going to come from the lens of big picture first, and then towards the end of the presentation, we're going to talk about some more local things and local solutions. I would like to, towards the end of my my part, allow some time for questions and conversation around the topic in general, and making sure that we are all, by the end of this call, experts on what is occupational segregation, because that's one of those terms that we don't typically use in our day-to-day language. But so we will get started. If you, I can't, yeah. Next slide. So I will start by introducing myself. I am Nicole Carey from the Indy Equity Collaborative. I'm a research scientist, and I come from the lens of sociology. And I've actually done extensive research on occupational segregation. I don't know if you knew that when you asked me to present, Laura, but I was not typically something I get to present on, so I was really excited to be with you all today. We do at Indy Equity, we do research, strategic planning for organizations, coaching, and professional development. And the reason I say that is because what I'm hoping that you walk away with today is these theoretical concepts, these larger intangible themes that we talk about. You really can take that knowledge and put that into your strategic planning in your organization. You can understand how things affect us on a systemic level, this big macro level, and then figure out how to make that make sense in your day-to-day, and what does that mean for this quarter or this year. Next slide. So we're going to start by just talking about several reasons why this conversation is important. When we're talking about occupational segregation today, I'm going to talk about gender and race. But really, occupational segregation can refer to any specific social group or social identity that has overrepresentation or underrepresentation across different fields and disciplines. And so we're talking about it today in a container of workforce. We're talking about employment. However, this is really an issue that is affecting all aspects of our society. So we're going to need to be able to have a conversation about, how does education play a role? How does our healthcare system play a role? All of these different disconnected conversations are actually really connected and play a part. And so I'm going to have a little bit of conversation around that as well. And then just high level, it matters because if we continue to perpetuate this, this cycle of occupational segregation, it's going to continue to limit the possibilities. And so my first example of how this connects to other parts or other systems in our communities is if we are limiting economic mobility and we continue a cycle of poverty, what happens in education in our schooling systems, folks say, well, if you get a good education, that is a ticket out of the cycle of poverty. I'm sure many of you have heard that, as if education alone is the ticket to a better future. And it is one piece of the puzzle. But if we are then taking those grads that have this education and funneling them into a specific field that is appropriate for their gender or appropriate for their race in our minds, then the cycle continues. So it is a very, very important piece of the puzzle. Next slide. All right, thank you. So we're going to talk about history for just a moment. Those of you who have taken any of my workshops know that history is my least favorite thing to talk about. But one of the things that I've come to realize is extremely important in understanding. If you don't understand the historical roots of how you got to where you are, it is very, very easy to perpetuate and continue to repeat history. So I have just a few notes on the screen here, but I want to talk about let's just going back to maybe Jim Crow era. So obviously we have a legacy of enslavement in this country, and that was a clear racial distinction between who does what kind of work. But even after segregation, there was this after the time of enslavement, there is a very clear demarcation in history around who can work what jobs. And so historically, Black or African American folks have been delegated to service roles of service, roles of manual labor. And white folks have been dominating professional and managerial positions. That was a direct reflection of what life looked like during the times of slavery. And that was through a lot of the 20th century was enforced by law, by Jim Crow laws. That also plays a part with immigration. So as we had influxes of immigration, laws protected certain groups of people in employment until the 60s. It was very acceptable. So for example, when the New Deal was enforced after the Great Depression, or the Social Security Act, minimum wage laws, things that were putting into effect that were progress for society, those jobs those laws excluded the jobs that were predominantly held by Black Americans and immigrant workers, and that then further entrenched racial divides in labor opportunities. So historically, we have a very, very clear history of how folks have been divided. Even our unions, the unions have been historically a place where there are lots of racial divides. So unions that would not for a very long time allow any African American or female representation. So the second piece here is our modern reinforcement. That is our, de jure, our legal history. Now we have these things like the Equal Opportunity Act, and we have non-discrimination laws saying that if you dream it, then you can be it, right? If you want to do, you can do anything you want to do. That's what I was told when I was younger. However, there are modern ways that we reinforce occupational segregation the same way that it was in the past. And one way is through our education system, tracking folks to certain types of opportunities. So personally, I was tracked into a high ability program. There were a cohort of 30 kids in my school district that had this special track of education that propelled us to a different level of high quality curriculum and high level math and things that would allow us to have different career opportunities, different things that we were able to see. I was one of 2 people of color in that cohort. And that seems to track nationally according to the data. So in our education system, if we are telling kids what they can be from the very beginning, those narratives continue to reinforce themselves. I want you to think for a second, if I say neonatologist, what pops into your mind? If I say software engineer, what pops into your mind? If I say farm worker, what pops into your mind? And I'm not going to ask you to put it in the comments or say out loud, like, this is what I thought of, because time after time, we are going to be able to tell you, the research says that these controlling images in our head of what people should be is not just something that we consciously decide to think. So implicit bias, one of the things that I always say at the beginning of my trainings is that DEI, diversity training, is dangerous and it's not as effective as people think. And that's because if we just say, hey, here's your bias, bias exists, everybody has it, but then we don't give you the tools of what to do with that, then it tends to continue to perpetuate it, but then create a culture that we can talk about it, but we don't have the tools to do anything about it. And so the first step is recognizing how we reinforce these societal patterns through implicit bias, but also just through these large racialized and genderized systems that have existed long before any of us were here. And then again, under-resourced communities, if you have this limitation of what you can see, the opportunities that you have, the education that you can receive, the places you can visit, the people, the careers that you can see, that limited mobility is going to continue to perpetuate itself. Next slide. Okay. I would be remiss if I did not bring to the table the conversation of intersectionality, because that is the framework that I always use. I talk about doing intersectionality. And so here I bring 3 perspectives. We have white, Black, and Hispanic. And so if we're talking about those as categories, then we will have different numbers and different comparisons to make. And oftentimes we do that. I know we talk about, the rate of diabetes in the Black community, or we talk about the breastfeeding rate with Hispanic women, but we don't bring in always conversations of intersectionality. We need to think about language. We need to think about immigration status. We need to think about gender identity, and we need to think about people's experience in all of their social identities, because all of those things will have a complex role in how people are experiencing the workplace. And this is where I typically lose people. So if I've lost you, I just want you to stop here and take a deep breath. This is complex, and especially folks in HR really don't like me having these conversations because it's not easy to navigate. But when we're talking about occupational segregation, there are tiny nuances of things that we may not even be aware of. If we are saying we would like to hire, we had more diversity, are we tending to define diversity in a certain way? Are we thinking about skin tone? So if we're trying to increase the representation of Black folks in our organization, but almost all of the Black folks that we hire have a lighter skin tone, then maybe there is some learning around colorism that we can grow on. Those are conversations that are really nuanced and individualized to people and hard to put into policy. But the numbers don't lie. So when we talk about the wage gap, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later, there's a difference between white women and Black women and Hispanic women and how we experience disparity when it comes to pay. But then there's also a disparity between Black women and Black men, and a disparity between white women and Black men. And we can have those conversations when we bring this topic of intersectionality in. There's a lot of text on this slide. I'm just going to bring a couple points out that I thought were important to talk about. So white women do experience occupational segregation. What are gender biases that we bring into our organizations? What are roles that are appropriate for women? That has been something that's long been discussed. Who should be a secretary? Well, why are we still using that word? Someone asked me yesterday. Who are our nurses? What is our response when a young man says, I want a career in nursing? Maybe we don't say anything externally, but in our minds are like, I thought that was for girls. Those biases and stereotypes still exist. And in my experience, when I'm working with executive women, there is always a dynamic of imposter syndrome and this layer of trying to prove yourself because you are a woman that is not supposed to be in this executive role. It is very, very real. However, when we talk about Black women, that is a different conversation because along with gender bias, there's compounded discrimination due to race as well. And that's a different experience than a Black man. Some of the most interesting conversations that I've had are around the mobility opportunities that are different between Black men and Black women that don't exist for white women. Right. So if you have Black men and white women that represent your executive team, or you're pushing them towards certain careers because those are appropriate, then there's no racial discrimination and there's no gender discrimination. That's false. Because the experience of a Black woman is different. And also Hispanic women, and these are just the three categories that I am focusing on today to highlight an example, but really we can put any social identifier here. So queer men, queer white men versus queer or specifically a trans Black person that is of a certain age, right? So that's also, a factor. But going back to Hispanic women, that we tend to see more labor-intensive roles, low paying jobs such as housekeeping and food prep and working in farm working. So I just wanted to keep all of those things in mind. We're going to move on to the next slide and kind of dig in a little bit deeper here. The same topic. So here are some examples of how that plays out. So we're going to talk about when we separate people into these categories and we push them towards certain careers, what happens? Well, the wage gap happens. And I've heard a lot about the wage gap, but understanding that where it comes from is really important. How do people get to this place where they're pushed into these roles? So a lot of times talking about the wage gap, we're saying two people with equal qualifications, but in the same job title. But that's not always what we need to refer to when we're talking about the wage gap. Because if I've pushed you into a career that is oversaturated, that you have the skills and abilities to be in a different, higher paying career, that also is a part of the conversation of the wage gap. So I don't know if you're tracking here, but here I'll just say one example here. So Hispanic women are paid 59 cents for every dollar that a white man makes. And that is across the board of a profession. So what that looks like is something like $24,000. This is a median average salary, Hispanic women, white men. So that means white men on average are able to make $24,000 more in a year over year, invested year over year. Now we're talking about what your family, what this generation is able to pass on to the next generation. If I don't have the ability to make the same amount of money as you, now we're talking about a wealth gap, not just the consequences of today. This is a consequence for our children, for our communities, for a long time. And it's not just wages, it's also benefits. White men typically have more access to jobs that offer better benefits. And that then leads to a poverty rate that is much higher in communities of color. Next slide. Just a few more here. This is often a conversation that's not linked together, but something that's really important for us who work in organizations to understand. Because of this systemic issue, we have so many consequences. And so I'm going to go through several different kinds of consequences. Mental health, stress, and burnout, because your jobs are harder on the body. They are usually undervalued, which is why they have lower wages. We often instrumentalize and dehumanize folks that are on the front lines of our organizations. And that's really the underlying root cause of why this is so problematic for our society. Because if you, not saying that we need to eliminate all frontline roles and that everyone needs to be an engineer or a neonatologist, everyone needs to play a role in society, but how do we value those human beings through fair wages and through fair treatment that is humanizing to them? So when that is absent, the stress and burnout of those conditions are extremely high. Then you don't have the benefits to access mental health resources when you need them. And then that leads to anxiety and depression in higher rates in communities of color and those with lower socioeconomic status without structures of support. Next slide. That also takes a toll on our physical health. So if we have low quality healthcare or no healthcare at all, the options for your treatment, and if you have options at all, are very low. So the options for a person who does not have insurance or cannot afford insurance, the options for entrepreneurs like myself, the options for those that are on Medicaid are just different for those that have higher paying jobs when the employers contribute to your health insurance. I'll give you a really, really quick example. I used to be, in my former life, a dental hygienist, and I witnessed, so there was it was on the west side of Indianapolis, and a high immigrant population. I would say 80% of our patients were either immigrants they had little English or African American, and then we had 20% white patients. I would say maybe 30 to 35% of our patients had work insurance. Lots of cash patients, lots of Medicaid. I was able to witness how each individual dentist would change their treatment plan with the same circumstances, same x-rays, same presentation in the mouth based on insurance. And oftentimes I would ask, why did this patient get an extraction while that patient got recommended for a root canal? Because it's better for you if you can keep your teeth. There's so many consequences if you lose your teeth. And oftentimes the answer was, they're not going to pay. They're not going to be able to afford that. You didn't ask. Oftentimes our cash patients were the ones that were most compliant with treatment because they were there paying cash, they wanted to have a healthy mouth. And so just undervaluing our and dehumanizing people in all sorts of categories have these consequences. But insurance that comes from the workplace then takes its toll in healthcare and in the physical representation. And then there's the obvious longer hours, more repetitive work, and physical strain for more labor-intensive jobs that's physically straining and then leads to more chronic disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes, the inability to take time to take care of yourself. Next slide. And that obviously affects all of us in a community, because if you have struggles with mental health, you have struggles with your physical health, you don't have time to do anything other than continue to survive on this cycle, then that creates the conditions that for a community that is not thriving, and that's not good for anyone. Next slide. I put a lot of slides in here for such a short presentation. I just wanted to create a different visual instead of all of the text of what we were looking at. What are all of the things that if we allow occupational segregation to continue, the things that we'll continue to see? And hopefully we are understanding that it's not just workplace implications, but it is a quality of life implication, and it's an entire community implication. Next slide. Okay, so how does it happen? We do job sorting, and then we have persistent stereotypes. Another example, I was at a legislative breakfast. The Indiana Latino Institute holds legislative breakfasts every year to talk about policy. And someone, either 1 or 2 years ago, talking about the impending workforce crisis, said, we need to think about immigration because we need somebody to work in these factories. And so what happened in that moment was this person who is really trying to solve for the economic crisis that is looming in our workforce, and having enough folks to help our society continue to be prosperous, devalued a whole group of human beings and dehumanized what they are, what their purpose in our community is. And so when we push immigrants to any low-paying jobs, so not just agriculture, but working in factories, anything that is to the service of higher level thinking, we are really saying a statement about a whole category of people and their ability to think and their value as human beings. I don't know if he realized he said that in that moment, because I think it seemed really logical to say it to a group of Latinos in the breakfast. So it was confounding to me, but an example of how these stereotypes continue to persist in our community. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to give you 3 broad examples of folks that have said, okay, this is not okay, we're going to do something about it. And there's 3 different kinds of examples. So Salesforce, obviously, large corporation. Europe is a national nonprofit. And then I have the wonderful experience of being able to tell you today about the IU Health Fellowship. So a fellowship with students, and how they have began to attack occupational segregation. So with Salesforce, they started to change their hiring and promotion process and having diversity goals, but making sure that those diversity goals were not just blanket, right? So if we say we want a higher level of representation in our leadership, really defining what that looks like and making sure that there is diversity does not just mean one level of diversity, that we are really having intersectional and diversity across different factors. Year Up is a program that offers training and internship that has really, really great outcomes. They've been, I can't remember exactly how many years they've been in operation, but it's shown great examples of how folks in this 1-year training have lifted a whole cohort of folks to careers in IT and finance when they were on a pathway towards a lower paying, lower skilled job. And so those types of fellowship, or not fellowship, but those types of internships and trainings that have proven to be helpful as well. A local example that I just want to highlight, because I had the privilege of being with these young folks yesterday. Crispus High School, a historic Black high school in the center of Indianapolis, 60% Black students, close to, I think, 25 to 30% Hispanic students, and the rest are multiracial and other. So almost exclusively students of color there. I was speaking with 6 kiddos on a panel yesterday and asking them if they chose addicts because they wanted to be in healthcare. And one of them said yes, but the other 5 had not considered it. They went there because their brother went there, or they went there because they didn't want to go to the school that their brother went to, and they were trying to chart their own path. And they have this beautiful relationship with IU Health that's facilitated by an organization called the Mosaic Center that that has this training program, and they take them and have them shadow different healthcare professionals that are doctors and nurses, but also stenographers and folks that work at the foundation to show the business side of healthcare. They really give them these opportunities to explore what it looks like to be professionals. And then they graduate high school with their CMA and, I can't remember the medical assistant, but it's more than just a medical assistant. It's a different credential. So they graduate with 2 credentials, but 4 out of the 6 said that they were not interested in using those credentials because they want to continue on to college, which I don't think was IU Health's intention. I think that they were hoping that they would have more folks enter the workforce immediately because they have guaranteed employment with IU Health when they're done. However, they've seen opportunities that they had never seen before. And I was really excited to speak to one young lady who said that she wanted to be a forensic pathologist because she met one and thought it was the coolest thing that she had ever heard of. And now she's on that pathway and has done the research to figure out how she gets there. They consistently said the same thing. I didn't know I could do this. I didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't think I would be going to college. I thought I was going to do cosmetology because that's what my mom does, or that's what my auntie does. And that's what we need to realize. What you tell someone they can do, what you show someone they can do, they're going to believe that. And as a society, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we have said, hey, Black girl, this is what you can do. Hey, Asian boy specifically, this is what you can do. Hey, undocumented Mexican, the conversations that are popping into my head, because these are literal conversations that people have had, conversations that people have had. You're undocumented, so this is what you can do, and this is your value. And we may not say it in those words, but we say it, and they believe it. They internalize it, and they say, this is what I can do. And so this is just a local example of how we can show someone, no, actually, you can do this too. And here I'm in the building of 16 Tech. They're doing a beautiful job of showing what manufacturing and or advanced manufacturing and logistics, what that career can look like. What an engineer doesn't have to be this certain thing. You can be an artist and be an engineer. What does that look like? And so showing people who they can be is direct. That is liberation work, right? Because these persisting, controlling stereotypes are not just overt acts of racism. They are the air that we are breathing. They're the water, it's the water that we swim in. So just wanted to share those really quickly. Do I have one more slide? I think I have one more. So I know we're going to get into more specific steps that you all will talk about a little bit later, but what I typically run into is I am and then enter whoever you are. What can I do, right? Is this my place? Not everyone needs to be on the streets with a picket sign fighting inequitable systems. Sometimes we can do things that are very strategic, that are long-term plans. We can be disruptors in ways that are profound. We can encourage our youth. We can volunteer. There are lots of things we can do. But if we don't know about ourselves, where we stand, that's the first problem. So raising awareness for yourself, but then also calling things out and raising awareness in ways that are strategic in your place of employment or in your social groups. And then we are, the Indie Equity Collaborative. We are very big on collaboration. Who else is doing this work? Who else is having the same problem that I'm having and the struggles that I'm having? Sometimes it's not overtly ignoring the issue. Sometimes it's time. Sometimes it's funding. Sometimes it's exhaustion. I'm exhausted talking about all of the pressure and stress that society is putting on people, and it feels very heavy to carry this work. It is very heavy work. And so how are we taking care of ourselves, and how are we collaborating and sharing in the work? And then finally, really encouraging high mobility careers to those that have been historically excluded from those conversations. That is the work that needs to be done. And that encouragement it is all around us. It is in education. It is in our community centers. It is in our first places of employment. It is in our internships. It's in Fortune 500 companies. What are our mentorship programs? Those that work in the front lines of our organizations, what are the clear pathways of that they have available to them to shift to a high mobility career? Because if we don't have choices, if we don't see what's possible, then we will stay where we are, and then we won't have a choice to make. All right. That is all I wanted to share with you all today. I know this is not the end of the presentation, but I will have to hop off. And so I wanted to give you all any opportunity to either contribute a comment or an experience. I'm big on storytelling, or to ask a question if you have.
Mimi, I knew your hand was going to go up. Let's hear it, girl.
You're on mute still.
Yeah, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Sorry, my bad. I am wondering what we do to combat generational issues. Like I hear a lot from Nigerians who say, Mom and Dad won't let me do anything other than a medical professional, meaning a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant. Also, in other cultures do that too. Now, I know we're talking about the workplace, but we're also talking about addressing those young people. And how do we fight against that? We don't want to fight against, tradition and all of that, because that's what makes us culturally unique, but also kind of letting them know you can go beyond that and still be great.
So this is such a timely question. Thank you so much for your question. I'm currently doing a research study that's focused on Gen Z, Black and Hispanic possibilities in the workforce, and what resources that they'll need, especially with the new high school diploma redesign, where there's going to be lots of employers that have to do internships and all of those things. And that was actually pretty surprising to me, that one of the biggest barriers so Black, whether they are African American or from the Caribbean or anywhere in the diaspora or the continent, the answer has been the same, and it's different. It's different, but it's the same. So focus on school. Nothing else matters. Reading, math, focus. Science is a close third, but you focus on your studies, and nothing else can get in the way of that, because this trajectory, this is your way out. This is your definition of success. And so the biggest barriers that what we're hearing between white high schoolers and other high schoolers, non-white high schoolers, is that the limitation of opportunity to see things and to understand what you can be, and know that there are different possibilities that will bring pride and success to your family, when that is a value that you are wanting to honor. So it's not even just quietly showing the student that there are other things and they can rebel against their parents, or their family's traditions, but really bridging the conversation around what success looks like and what can bring pride to families. And what we are really finding is that this is why I was excited about the Mosaic Fellowship, is that those students would not have seen the possibilities, and they would not have gotten excited about nephrology, which is wild to me that that could be exciting to someone. But the experiences that they have will then be translated. Like, their parents obviously gave them the permission to be in that fellowship in high school because it was an opportunity to advance in a medical career, right? And so what are the conversations? What are the things that how are we contributing in our roles to that culturally responsive conversation with family? So the parents may not be the ones that say, hey, go do this creative arts experience at a college this summer, and that could be from limited finances, but it also could be like, I don't want you to be in the creative arts. That's not going to bring you success. And so how are we exposing those students to these opportunities so that they at least have the opportunity to have that negotiation and conversation with their family? To be determined.
Are the things that we love about Nicole and the way that her brain works and how she brings nuance to these conversations. So I dropped this in the chat, but we'll follow up with more information moving forward. We have Nicole and several other really amazing speakers at an upcoming seminar that we're hosting at the Children's Museum December 4th. So everyone that registered for this will get a follow-up email that will have more information about that event if you want to hear more about Nicole's doing intersectionality and more about a lot of other really great things that the community is working on. I do see a couple of hands up, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that we are at time for Nicole. So Nicole, I don't know if you have to hop off.
I do, but I have until
Okay.
11. So I'm going to answer the questions that are in the chat now. And if not, I will follow up via email that you can send out to everyone.
Perfect. So anybody that has their hands up, if you wouldn't mind dropping your question in the chat. I understand that conversationally it's a lot easier to ask questions sometimes than dropping them in the chat. But also know we will make sure that Nicole's contact information and your contact information are swapped so that this conversation can continue. Given the number of people that have participated and registered, we're pretty sure this is not the last you will hear of this topic. So keep the conversation going in the chat if you don't mind. And we're going to go ahead and keep moving forward. So I
Thank you so
appreciate
much. I just
Nicole.
wanted
Thank
to.
you. Yes, thank you so much for everything you bring to this topic. Really quickly, I'm going to move through just a couple of bits of information and data relevant to kind of what Nicole shared. And then we're going to pass it on to Child Trends to kind of wrap this up with some really cool information again about PYD and some strategies that you can have at your fingertips. So one thing that I just want to cover really quickly is just locally some data that shows occupational segregation in action. Right now, we are in discussions about what is a livable wage for Marion County for a single individual in the workforce, and that's hovering somewhere between $20 and $22 an hour, and that's bare minimum. Okay, that's not thriving, that's not saving, that's not a treat yourself day. That is just strictly to survive. So when you look at some of these roles that I have listed underneath, these are some of the roles that you'll see kind of perpetuating some occupational segregation here locally. And again, that's not to say that these aren't important roles. They very much are. But the conversation needs to shift to Nicole's point about what are we communicating to job seekers and to education and training seekers about where to take these jobs. So, excuse me. One thing that we can offer as EmployIndy is working with you on data collection. So we can pull information about what the education demands are for certain roles, what the training and skill sets are for certain roles. We can talk with you about where the growth or the demand for various roles are. We can talk about what the current workforce diversity looks like in those roles. And we can talk about jobs that have compatibility to really showcase what some of those career pathway opportunities look like. So that if you're talking with someone about being a home health aide or being a medical assistant or a nursing assistant or being a material handler or an assembler or a fabricator in a manufacturing setting, whatever it might be, we have access to all of this information that we can share with you about a current job, but then we can also show you what those paths to other opportunities look like. So what I've pulled out here really quickly is just a quick report talking about a nursing assistant job and what some of the compatible job opportunities are from nursing assistant to a potential next role. So these are roles that I pulled out that have what's called a compatibility index score of 85 or above. 85 is about as low as I would want to go on compatibility. If it gets any lower than 85, we're looking at not very compatible. So you're going to have to really stretch your skills from nursing assistant into a job that goes below 85. This is also showing here locally in Marion County what the estimated annual openings are going to be. So you'll notice 65 jobs in Marion County is not a lot, but looking at truck drivers, now you're talking about almost 700 jobs in that role. But then you're also looking at what that wage annually would be for that role. So these are three things to consider when you're talking with someone about being a nursing assistant. If you want one of the higher wage jobs, like a dental hygienist, like if you want to be a future Nicole Carey in that position, just understanding that the wage is really high, the compatibility is good, but the estimated job demands locally aren't great. So it's going to be a competitive field. And again, this is knowledge. This is giving individuals who are looking for career opportunities or education opportunities information to make informed decisions. So it's not to say you should steer everyone who's a nursing assistant, excuse me, into being a light truck driver because there's a high, demand for light truck drivers. That's a big stretch. There's not a lot of similarities there, but you could know, hey, you're going to make at least $22.50 starting off, and you're definitely going to be able to find a job. So maybe this is a conversation you have with a nursing assistant who's really struggling in that role and is looking to just kind of change the trajectory of where they want to go. So we can create reports like this for you that you can share with people who are talking about very specific jobs. So I would encourage you, if there's something that you're talking regularly with job seekers or career seekers, or even if you're recommending education and training opportunities, if there are specific roles that you're repeatedly recommending or talking to individuals about, get with us so that we can help you kind of understand what that role looks like currently as far as demographics, wages, demand, all sorts of data that we have access to. Because then we can help create reports like this that'll give you the tools that you need to continue that conversation with folks and give them all of those details and information. I won't go through this one, but this is just another example. Material handling in Central Indiana is a very, 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 very high demand job. There are a lot of jobs in that position or in that occupation currently. There's a lot of opportunity for growth in that position if you're getting into the logistics industry that go far beyond being a pick pack or a material handler. So just understanding what some of those, again, occupation crossovers look like. So I just encourage you, it doesn't matter where you're located. If you have data questions or want to kind of dig into some of this information on that level, we're happy to help. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Michael Bradley and Vanessa Sachs with Child Trends, and they will take it from here. So whoever's starting, let me know when you need me to switch over slides, and I'll be happy to take care of that for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Laura. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. I'm Vanessa Sachs. I'm a research scientist at Child Trends. I'm joined by Mike Bradley, as Laura said. And Child Trends is a national nonprofit research organization, and we're entirely focused on improving the lives of children, youth, and families. And so next slide. We kind of have talked a little bit about, what is occupational segregation, was the history of it, what are the effects of that? And then Laura just shared one tool at your disposal in your roles to interrupt occupational segregation, which is data and information. So we're going to kind of talk through another tool that you can use, which is positive youth development approaches. After you go back one slide, or two slides there, thank you. So at Child Trends, we've been doing research on how positive youth development can be used by workforce development practitioners and professionals in preparing young adult job seekers, and also what it looks like in the workplace when employers are implementing positive youth development, even if they're not calling it that, to create positive work environments for young adults. And so, as Laura said, we've been doing this as part of our role in the Annie Casey Foundation's Generation Work initiatives. So we're not occupational segregation experts, we are experts in positive youth development. So what we're going to talk through is 2 ways that you can apply positive youth development principles in your work with young adult job seekers. And although we're focused on young adults, I'm guessing that you're going to see a lot of ways you could apply this to older job seekers as well. So we're going to think about what you can do in your work as you're thinking about what jobs and careers to explore. So what you can actually do to prepare young adult job seekers. And then also as they're considering a specific job or a specific employer, what you and young adult workers can look for in an employer. And we'll be thinking about those with a specific lens of how it relates to occupational segregation and that role you can play in interrupting occupational segregation. So we'll start with a little bit of background about positive youth development more broadly, which will give you some context for how we landed on the positive youth development informed practices that we're going to be talking about today. And you might be pretty familiar with positive youth development, or it may be newer to you, but we always think no matter where you're coming from on this topic, it's always helpful to have some basic definitions and level setting and context. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike, but please feel free to use the chat or get our attention if you have clarifying questions as we go through. And I know we're going to have time for some questions at the end. So with that, I'll hand it to Mike to go through what is positive development.
Yes, thank you. Laura, you can go forward 2 slides. There we go. So before we dive into applying a positive youth lens to occupational segregation, I'll quickly go over what it is that we mean when we say positive youth development. And it's worth mentioning that when we refer to young adults, we're talking about those that fall within the ages of 18 and 29. And youth.gov defines PYD as an intentional pro-social approach that engages youth in a way that is both productive and constructive. It recognizes, utilizes, and enhances youth strengths, and it promotes positive outcomes for young people by providing opportunities, fostering positive relationships, and furnishing the support needed to build on their leadership strengths. Next slide, please. So when we take that somewhat long definition and translate it into actual practices, as well as our knowledge that young adults' brains are still developing well into their 20s, we end up with this developmentally appropriate approach that is supportive, non-punitive, youth-oriented, relationship-based, and age-appropriate. And another marker of PYD approaches is that they consider the whole person, but they focus on individualized challenges. We can think of this as, what does this particular young person need given their goals, their needs, and their obstacles? Next slide, please. So now that we've gone over what PYD is broadly, let's talk about how you can apply PYD in your work with young adult job seekers. Child Trends developed the pilot assessment with funding from Annie Casey Foundation as part of the Generation Work initiative. And the assessment was grounded in the research and then piloted by several youth serving organizations across the country, and then tweaked based on their responses and their experiences. It was developed as a tool to help apply positive youth development approaches in youth and young adult serving workforce development programs. And under each domain, represented by the letters that spell out pilot, there are concrete practices for staff and programs to implement in order to support young adults in the program. These items can simply be a resource for staff to turn to as they're thinking about PYD approaches, but they can also be used as a self-assessment tool, a discussion guide, or an accountability tool. And some of the Generation Work partners have used it that way, and we'd be happy to talk about that later if that's of interest. But one way that we're going to talk about using the pilot tool today is by showing you which specific PYD practices that support young adults to find jobs that are well aligned with their goals and their needs can also help programs more intentionally respond to occupational segregation. Next slide. So the specific practices in the pilot tool are organized into 5 domains or topic areas. And as I mentioned previously, there is one for each letter in the word pilot. Let me go through a couple of them to give you a better sense of what each domain in pilot describes and the types of approaches workforce development professionals might use in your work with young adult job seekers. So if we look at I, improved skills, the practices in this domain are ways that workforce development staff can provide opportunities for participants to learn technical, intellectual, emotional, and social skills that prepare them for jobs and to make positive decisions about education and employment. And then if we look at L, linkages across schools, work, and communities, the practices in this domain are all about ways that workforce development staff can recognize and support positive linkages among participants, schools, workplaces, families, and communities. So now that we have the big picture, let's look at a few specific practices from the pilot tool that you might use in your work on occupational segregation. There are several practices from the improved skills domain of the tool that you might find particularly useful in the context of addressing occupational segregation, some of which Dr. Carey just spoke to. So the practices in the improved skills domain are all about how we can meet young adults where they are in order to help them prepare for different kinds of jobs and careers and equip them to make positive decisions about jobs and work. So I'll highlight a few of these practices. Excuse me. Engage young adults in identifying positive goals and the skills needed to achieve those goals. Young adults need additional support and scaffolding to set and make plans to achieve those goals, and to understand what skills and opportunities are going to put them on a path to achieving those goals. So understanding their unique goals opens the door to identifying what jobs and what fields would be a good fit for those goals, and when they might otherwise gravitate toward a field because that's what their family, friends, or others around them do. Be aware of and address stereotypes. This speaks directly to one root of occupational segregation and is all about being aware of our often unconscious ideas about who is a good fit for certain kinds of work. And then support young adults to think about internships, job shadowing, or short-term placements that provide professional skills and connections. These kinds of opportunities aren't always available, but they can help young people build social capital outside of their immediate network. These PYD-aligned approaches are about encouraging young people to think about their own goals and make plans to achieve them. And connecting their skills and the skills they learn with specific jobs can allow them to see career progression, but it's also important for staff to know how to identify those opportunities for young adults to apply those skills. Next slide, please. Additionally, there are a couple of practices that I wanted to highlight in the linkages across schools, work, families, and communities domain. Practices in this domain are about the ways that we acknowledge and support young adults in all areas of their lives, both work and outside of work. Coach young adults about questions to ask supervisors about job scheduling, hours, eligibility for benefits, insurance, and leave, and then link adults to mentors who share their experiences and backgrounds. Setting young adults up with what questions they need to ask employers sets them up for getting the information they need to determine how a job will fit into their life and whether it aligns with their other priorities outside of work. And then linking adult workers with others who have been in their position looking for a job or who come from their community or share similar background and are working in a career field that they might not have considered or that they haven't really been exposed to allows them to see a different set of possibilities. It's important to note that these are just a few of the pilot practices. There are practices within the tool that may also relate to breaking the occupational segregation cycle. So we'd encourage you all to take a look at the tool, which we'll send around afterwards, or which is linked in the original slide about the pilot assessment. So I'm going to pass this over to Vanessa now, who is going to talk more about positive youth development in the workplace and how you and job seekers can recognize an employer that is creating a positive work environment for young adults.
Thanks, Mike. So before I jump into talking about what you and young adult job seekers can look for to know that a workplace could be supportive and a positive place for young adult workers, I just want to caveat things a bit by saying there's a lot of research about what positive youth development looks like in youth and young adult serving programs, including workforce development programs. There's a lot less about what it looks like in the workplace. So, what are employers like actually doing? Like if we say positive youth development in the workplace, like what do we mean? What are the policies and practices that they have in place that are likely to support young adults? And how can we recognize those from the outside, or how can we recognize when that's happening? So one way that Child Trends and others have been working on surfacing these employer practices is to crosswalk what we know about what makes a quality job with what we know supports young adults. So we've crosswalked the National Fund for Workforce Solutions job design framework, which you see on the slide here, with the pilot tool to see where there's overlap and to lift up those practices. So next slide. So there's 3 areas in particular where we've seen stronger alignment between markers of job quality and markers of positive youth development. And those are supervision and professional development and worker voice. So we've talked to employers and young adults and workforce development practitioners about what employers are doing to support young adults in the workplace. And we've identified several promising, we can't yet say proven, but promising practices that are aligned with the research on positive youth development. And these are things that real employers are doing. You might also be familiar with the 2023 EmployIndy Racial Equity Report, which was prepared by the Indy Equity Collaborative, which lifts up recommendations for actionable strategies that employers can put in place to increase racial equity within their organizations. And those came out of discussions with young adults of color about their perceptions of racial inequities in the workplace. And those strategies in that report are really closely aligned with the practices that we're lifting up today. So just to tie this back to occupational segregation, these are practices that you can look for in potential employers, and then you can work with young job seekers to ask employers about as a way to support them to have agency in thinking about whether a job or an employer is the right fit for them, rather than kind of going down a more well-worn path or choosing a job because it's familiar or it's what maybe their family is more guiding them toward. So next slide. So starting with supervision, a few of the practices that employers have implemented that are aligned with positive youth development are managers communicating expectations about jobs clearly, even just starting in the interview process. Managers getting to know young adults as individuals, meaning they get to know their interests and their goals and their strengths and their personalities. Employers investing in equipping managers with the knowledge and skills to be effective people managers, and managers facilitating young adults relationships across the organization with multiple staff and managers or mentors. So you can kind of see across all these practices the ways that these are really about how employers support the development of positive relationships in the workplace, and positive relationships are the bedrock of positive youth development approaches. So when you're working with young adults who are looking for or seeking employment, these are some questions you could ask of employers, they could ask of employers, or you could ask of employers about what kinds of supervision practices and policies a company has in place. So if you just click Laura, we'll have some questions pop up. They should pop up. There they come. And so they might ask, how do managers here help employees have a clear understanding of expectations and responsibilities? Or how do managers typically get to know their team members personally and professionally? How do managers get feedback on their leadership style and effectiveness? Are there any programs or groups here that help employees build relationships across departments or across seniorities? And of course, you work with young adults to translate this into their own language and their own voice and in a way that makes sense to them. Next slide. So looking at professional development practices that are aligned with positive youth development, it might be managers creating a really structured and supported and safe environment where young adults can ask questions and help them take responsibility for their training and work. Managers working with young adults to set and work toward goals to achieve success. Employers providing young adults with both internal and external training opportunities, and employers having clearly articulated pathways and processes for promotion and growth. So if you click, Laura, we'll have some questions that potentially young workers can ask employers to try and identify whether these practices are happening. They could ask, what opportunities would an early career worker like me have to take ownership of projects or tasks in this role? What are the challenges that young employees face when they are working toward their goals? How does this company help them overcome those challenges? What opportunities are there for training? And what are some common career paths for young employees in this company? And how do you support young workers to progress along those paths? The next slide. So finally, worker voice, thinking about some practices that employers are implementing are collecting feedback from every person on a team, including the earliest career, most junior person on a team, as a component of just regular project work. Employers and managers are recognizing young adults for their contributions and ideas, and employers make leadership and management available and accessible for feedback from young adults. So some questions you might ask. I wonder if anybody else has, I know we're running short on time, so maybe I'll just say, add to the chat. I'm going to go through what our ideas are about questions, but you all can put in the chat any other thoughts you have about what young adult job seekers might ask, or things that you might want to ask of employers as you're partnering with them or considering partnering with them. And as Dr. Carey said, collaborating with those inclusive employers, like what might you ask to sort of identify them? But the things we came up with, if you click again, Laura, it should come up, are what opportunities do early career employees have to give feedback during projects? So it could be both feedback during project work and also feedback on like more globally across the organization. What's an example of a time when employee feedback was used to improve future processes or create learning opportunities? Is there a platform or system where young employees can share their ideas or suggestions? And how do you ensure that employee concerns and ideas are heard and addressed? So you can see how all of these practices that we talked about can support the development of positive relationships, and they build trustworthy, safe spaces. They give young adults opportunities to belong and contribute. All of that contributes to a good place to work. And if young adults can look for and recognize these kinds of supportive practices, they can hopefully end up in a workplace where they can grow and flourish, where they may not have otherwise seen an opportunity for themselves. And ultimately, kind of longer term, we would hope that more employers having positive youth development practices like these could impact occupational segregation by creating more of the viable places for young workers of color to see themselves and to get needed support. So they don't feel like they just have to go where they know it's familiar or where they know my friends have all gone or my family goes. And really, we're creating more spaces where people can see themselves and see opportunities for themselves. So that was a bit whirlwind, but I want to make sure we have time for discussion and questions. And I think Laura and Victoria, you talk about some next steps as well.
Yeah, so much like we did with Nicole, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. We have about 10 minutes before we'll let you guys get back to your day. So maybe while I wait for some raised hands or some questions in the chat, I'll just share with you all. We think this is an extremely important topic here locally. No job should be out of the question for folks. It should just be a matter of where do you need to start to get where you want to go. So a lot of what we want to do in having these conversations is make sure that all of you who have an integral role to play in those placement services and opportunities have the tools that you need to have those strong conversations to unearth what that potential can look like for the individuals you serve. So that doesn't change. I know we have a lot of folks, especially from Goodwill, that are not in the state of Indiana. That doesn't change in your communities. I hope you have similar resources there to, support you as you attack this conversation. But we're also here to help you do that as an organization here in Marion County. So our goals are to continue this conversation based on what you need and where you found the most relevancy. So we'll follow up not only with a link to the recording and the slides, but also we'll probably pose some questions to you about where do you want to take this conversation next? What pieces of this do you want to dig into a little bit deeper? Are there trainings that we can provide you around how to ask some of these questions, or how to guide some of your participants and job seekers and how to ask these questions of employers? And the commitment that we'll make to you on our end is ensuring that, especially here in Marion County, which is again the area that EmployIndy serves, how are we encouraging employers to do the internal work so that when job seekers are going to them, they are having that full support from the employers themselves. So while this puts a lot of the onus on the individual and you as the support service, know that the other half of this conversation is us working with employers to make sure that they understand we are telling job seekers this information. We are giving them this data to help them make the most informed decisions. And because of that, if they are coming to you as a potential employer and they're asking you these tough questions, you better know the answers and you better be truthful in the work that you are doing to commit to them that you are going to support them in these ways. So it is not a one-sided coin. It is definitely something that requires a lot of people to come to the conversation. So we just really appreciate you all taking the time today. Apologies for the rough start as I dropped the ball getting everybody what they needed to get us started. But I loved the questions that you had, and I feel like we had some really great conversation today. So with that, I will leave a few minutes for questions. And if you feel pretty satisfied, just stay tuned, and we will be sending out some follow-up information in the next couple of days. Thank you, Gladys. We're so glad you joined us today. So thank you to everybody who sent the questions to Dr. Carey. Those were some really deep, thoughtful questions. I know that this is the work that she does on a daily basis, so I'm encouraged that you all found value in what she shared, and she'll continue to share. All right, well, I'm seeing a lot of folks hopping off and I don't see any additional questions. Please know I put my email in the chat earlier. You can reach out to me and I can connect you with both Child Trends, Goodwill, and with Nicole. And we will make sure to, like I said, keep the conversation going. So thank you everybody so much. Have a great rest of your week.